Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be going back in time. We're going to look at some really compelling research that is linking multiple sclerosis to a type of parasite. It is a protozoa, and we believe that it's like malaria or Babesia. It's part of the same family. And it's so important to talk about this because you've probably never heard of this significant link between this type of parasite and multiple sclerosis. And this has huge implications on how we treat and diagnose MS. If we haven't met, my name is Pam Bartha, and I'm the author of Become a Wellness Champion and the founder of Live Disease Free. And I love researching about these topics. I'm an avid researcher. And I do because I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at the age of 28. I thought I was a really healthy person. I had never been sick, the odd cold, but rarely, if ever. I was always healthy. I was a young mom. I had 2 young children. And I went from being this super active, healthy person to having this incurable disease. And I just thought, this just doesn't make sense. You can't just be healthy one minute and then all of a sudden, oh, you're just going to be completely disabled. There's nothing you can do. And there's this mysterious thing taking over your body. So I reached out to God and I prayed from the bottom of my heart, just begging for answers, begging that He would help me. He answered a lot of my prayers in the past. And long story short, I learned very early on that multiple sclerosis is caused by different types of chronic parasitic infections in the body. And as I focused on trying to figure out which ones and treating them, I was able to stay MS free. And now it's been over 36 years. We have learned a lot over the past 36 years. Since then, I've coached thousands of people all over the world, helping them to recover from different types of chronic diseases caused by parasites. And today, this link is not just with multiple sclerosis, but we're going to talk about MS and how this protozoa, there's so much evidence that this protozoa plays a really big impact in many people that have MS and other neurological diseases. And then we're going to talk about why was this research dropped? It's so incredibly awful. So let's go back to the historical research about multiple sclerosis and this. It's like a malaria, Babesia. The reason we don't know is because it has never been tested in multiple sclerosis patients. Although it was back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, there were researchers back then that when they were treating malaria, especially in the United States, when they were treating people that were coming down with malaria, they found that it really helped MS patients, the malaria drug that they were using, and I believe it was quinine back then. And so they were treating malaria and they were like, wow, all these MS patients are doing amazing on this drug. So that really led some researchers and doctors to start studying this. And from that point on, there were at least 75 peer-reviewed journal articles that were published. 75. And so what they found is that when they would treat multiple sclerosis, they would have significant symptom improvements. When they treated them with malaria drugs, they would have significant symptom improvements, and some of them would be virtually free of symptoms. They also were able to find this protozoa, this malaria Babesia protozoa, in MS patients in their brain, and it was really hard to find this parasite. So it wasn't a parasite that was easy to find. This was again, back in the early 1900s, but they actually were able to find this malaria parasite in 30 to 40% of MS patients. Sorry, they had antibodies to this malaria parasite. And in about 20% of the patients, they were able to find DNA in their blood from this malaria parasite. So this was many years ago, before we had really the testing that we have today. And it really tweaked their curiosity. So today it's going to be an overview talking about this historical research and also more current research and other clinical findings that doctors and researchers have found similarities between protozoa like malaria or Babesia and multiple sclerosis. But I actually have a 6-part series on our website, livediseasefree.com. And if you want to go deeper into this, if you want to look at the scientific articles and start studying this yourself, make sure to just go to, actually you can do a Google search, just do live disease free and malaria, and then you're going to find the link to the group of blog posts that I did on this topic. So again, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, this is where this whole research began, because they really did notice also that people that had malaria had very similar symptoms to MS and vice versa. And then they also were treating malaria, and they found that when they were treating malaria, it really helped MS patients. And then another researcher, Kissler, he went on to look at he found that 30 to 40% of MS patients had antibodies against malaria parasites, and about 20% had the malaria parasite DNA in their blood. What's really interesting about all of these MS patients that had malaria, none of them had traveled to tropical environments or tropical zones. So you don't have to travel to get malaria. It's not really tested for, but malaria is present in Canada, it's present in the United States, it's probably present in many countries, but they're not looking for it unless you're really sick and you just got back from a certain country where it's more commonly found. They're not looking for it. So what's really interesting is that malaria causes many similar symptoms to multiple sclerosis: tremors, gait issues, vision, many neurological symptoms that we see in multiple sclerosis, but other chronic diseases also. So malaria is a protozoa. Babesia, malaria, they're part of the same family. Think of them as cousins. And what they do is they infect our red blood cells, and the red blood cells become sick and they become sticky. And once they're sticky, then they start to attach themselves to our blood vessels. They also stick to each other. So you can just imagine if you get some of these sick red blood cells that lodge themselves into the small capillary vessels in our brain, and they can start to build up, and they can actually produce an obstruction, and they can cause a microbleed. And I have talked about how multiple sclerosis is considered a vascular disorder, more so than an autoimmune disorder. There's a lot of research on that also. And this would really help to make sense of how this could cause inflammation in our blood vessels. This could also cause brain bleeds, and that would cause lesions, because all of a sudden things from our blood are going to spill into our brain. And that cannot happen. And so our immune system will contain that, will try to contain that. And that can be the formation of a lesion. What's also really interesting is that they found that with these microbleeds, with malaria, that of course the red blood cells are going to spill into the brain because the blood vessel is broken. And they would find these ring lesions, so lesions of iron, around the outside edge of the lesion, which is crazy. So with MS, there is this lesion, right? That's how they diagnose multiple sclerosis, is that we have lesions. But they're also finding that another important factor is that these lesions are always around a blood vessel. So that makes sense. Like if a blood vessel is going to rupture, then we can have a lesion there. So lesions in MS are always centered around a blood vessel, or there's always a blood vessel running through the lesion. And then they find these rings, like an iron ring, a deposit. And you think, well, why would that be around the outside edge of the lesion? Well, that is because the red blood cells carry a lot of iron and hemoglobin. And so that ends up depositing around the outside edge of the lesions. So incredible that there are all these things that our experts are not even considering or even looking at. And this has been known for over 100 years, a lot of this research. So again, what's so critical is that with MS, with lesions, that there is a blood vessel that runs through it. And it's almost like the blood vessel is like either rupturing, depositing its material, causing the lesion. Could it be feeding the parasites too in that area? I don't know. but it's interesting how the lesions are always centered around a blood vessel, and also the stickiness of Babesia or malaria, how they cause our red blood cells to become sticky and sick, and also they can cause microbleeds. And this is so consistent with what we know about the vascular disorder that multiple sclerosis is. Many of you may not have heard that before. Make sure to check out my blog post. Again, Google search "Live Disease-Free, MS is a vascular disorder," and you'll be blown away. It's like, why are we calling it an autoimmune disorder when there's so much evidence showing that it is a vascular disorder? So, could a parasite drive multiple sclerosis? Well, if you joined last week, I shared a ton of evidence that Borrelia, which causes Lyme disease, it's one of the microbes or infections that are part of the vector-borne infections we call Lyme disease. And there is a mountain of evidence that that one bacteria is very common in multiple sclerosis. And then today we're talking about a malaria Babesia. If it is Babesia, that is also another co-infection of Lyme disease that travels together with Borrelia and Bartonella and quite a few other infections. And so could these parasites be driving multiple sclerosis, be causing MS? Oh, yes, they certainly can. So very often we have these chronic infections in our body that our immune system cannot clear, and that chronic infection causes chronic inflammation. And then it's like our immune system is trying to handle it, but it's not able to fully, especially when we have a huge amount of stress. So maybe we're not sleeping enough, maybe we're eating a ton of food that feeds these parasites, maybe we're going through tremendous amounts of stress. All of these factors and more will impact our immune function. And if our immune function is more suppressed, then those parasites are not going to be contained as well, and then we can have more flares. So this is like chronic activation of the immune system, chronic inflammation. And then when we have these flares, this is where we can end up with more of the the brain bleeds, right? Where we have blood vessels that are becoming ruptured because of maybe obstructions from these sticky red blood cells. And then when we have these breakages of the blood vessels, things spill into our brain. We end up with a lesion there. There's a lot of war going on there. Your immune system is like, oh my gosh, this stuff shouldn't be here. We got to get rid of it. It's all foreign material that should not be in your brain. That's their job, is to protect our brain. And what's so sad is that Western medicine, it's all about, oh no, your immune system has just gone haywire for no reason. We need to shut it down. It's like, no, you don't need to shut it down. You need to support it. You need to treat these parasites, and then people can recover. So again, these brain bleeds would cause blood-brain barrier to be compromised, and we would end up with microbleeds, and we would end up with lesions. And then as the cleanup crew, the immune system is there, it would definitely be breaking down all of this material, and we could have an iron deposit, these rings around the lesions, because that was remnant from the red blood cells that carry a lot of iron into those lesions because they're not supposed to be there. They're supposed to be in the blood vessels. So there is all of this information that is so incredibly compelling, all of these scientific studies, and you just wonder, why was this dropped? Like, it was almost like all of this research, whether it's Lyme, looking at Borrelia, whether it's looking at this Babesia malaria type infection, it was all dropped right around the 1960s, in that area, in that time. And what's so interesting is that at that time, they really started to focus on talking about autoimmune disease, right? So at that time, it was all, oh, your immune system is attacking itself for no reason. And all the research got dropped, virtually all, not all of it. I wanted to share with you some really compelling research that is more recent. So I've done a talk about this. If you want to go into more detail on this study, then you can just, again, do multiple sclerosis. A malaria drug helps MS, and live disease-free, and you'll find that study that I talked about. But it's a study by, again, the University of Calgary, and they're awesome. They're one of the few research institutes that are looking at dysbiosis, looking at different types of infections that can cause MS. And so this was like a 1921 study where this was done at the University of Calgary, and they tested hydroxychloroquine, which is a malaria drug. So malaria and Babesia, I talked about how they're cousins, how they're related. They're the same type of microbe. They both infect red blood cells, and they're treated the same way also. So we don't know for sure if this study was helping Babesia or malaria, or maybe another cousin, but some type of protozoa that's very similar to those. So 1921, they gave primary progressive multiple sclerosis patients hydroxychloroquine. So with primary progressive multiple sclerosis, normally about 40% of participants would decline in their mobility, their walking ability, over 18 months. So normally 40% would have decreased mobility, walking mobility, in 18 months. But with the use of hydroxychloroquine, when they gave that to these participants, only 23% got worse. Their mobility decreased. That is a 42% reduction in the expected progression. So this drug literally slowed down the progression of the primary progressive multiple sclerosis in as little as 18 months. Over the 18 months, it slowed it down. I would say that is more than the MS drugs will do. And so they also showed that hydroxychloroquine reduced inflammation in the central nervous system and had neuroprotective effects in testing that they did. Huge. It decreased inflammation in the central nervous system, and it had neuroprotective effects. And why? Could it be because it is a parasite drug and they were treating a parasite that has been linked to MS like over 100 years? Interesting. So this is not a perfect story, but it really helps to share a lot of research that should be followed up with. They should try to prove them wrong. They should look at the spinal fluid of MS patients. They should be testing it for Babesia, for malaria, looking at brain. So there's people that have passed away and their brain and their central nervous system is kept in brain banks. They should be looking at this, but they find no value in researching this. They find no value in looking for infections, parasites that could cause multiple sclerosis. They like very much the way that we treat MS with the disease-modifying immunosuppressive drugs, and also with using lumbar punctures and MRIs to use those drugs. They're very lucrative. They're at least around $100,000 per year. Very old drugs, lost their patent, treating cancer, a lot of them, and now they're used for MS and other chronic diseases. It is a very lucrative industry, and it's interesting how they're allowed to say we find no value. And so we really need to support different groups that are going to fund this type of research, because we want a cure. We do not want to continue to progress with losing our health and losing our life and dying prematurely and not living our life. So it's really important that we start to support research that looks for a cure, that looks for what is causing multiple sclerosis and other chronic diseases. So I just want to really commend the University of Calgary. You're doing excellent, excellent work. You are in the game. You are doing research that will help multiple sclerosis patients. So amazing. Just keep it up. It's really awesome. And you've done some other good studies also with just looking at different types of disruptions in the microbiome and dysbiosis in multiple sclerosis, meaning that we're really out of balance. We don't have enough health promoting microbes and we have too many disease causing microbes. So what can we do? Like how can we tell if we could possibly have this type of protozoa? So it's not a bacteria. It's different than bacteria. It's a single-celled parasites, but it has a more similar physiology or structure to our cells than to bacteria. It's more complex cell. Number one, look at all of the symptoms of Babesia. They're easily. You can find them online. There's a lot of different specific symptoms, especially changes in your red blood cells, like decreased red blood cell count, or changes in your MCV or MCHC, etc. So looking at changes in your red blood cells, looking at issues with your blood vessels, with your vascular system, with your heart, etc., but more just the blood vessels. And then also looking at other common symptoms that you can find. And if you suspect that you have malaria or Babesia, it's pretty hard to be tested. So what our students are doing is we're using oxygen therapies, and we're using herbs for these smaller protozoa when we're recovering from chronic diseases like multiple sclerosis, but others. We know that we're dealing with worms, and we're dealing with protozoa, and we're dealing with bacteria, and also fungi. So we're treating with herbs, but also with parasite drugs, and also oxygen therapies. And it takes a combination, but also like a lot of strategy as far as getting ready to treat, feeling a lot better. But it's really important to treat these infections and not suppress our immune system. Otherwise, these infections become stronger in time. All right, let's see here. I just want to make sure that you guys can see me here. Okay, where is it? Awesome. Let's see here. Yes, perfect. Okay, so I will be back next week, and next week I will be kind of wrapping up all of these topics. I've talked about different types of worms in multiple sclerosis. I've also talked about the Borrelia link, the Lyme disease link, which was huge. Make sure to check those videos out if you haven't seen them already. And then also this week, I'm talking about this protozoa. So next week, I'm going to just bring it all together. We'll go deeper into the steps we take to recover. But it has to be strategic, because I always explain it like a really weedy garden, right? If you have weeds in your garden, it's not going to be just one type of weed. It's going to be multiple types of weeds. And so it's really important that when we want to recover, we have to acknowledge that we're not just going to have Borrelia or Babesia or malaria. We're going to have all kinds of different pests inside of us. And so we have to treat from big to small over multiple cycles. And that's how we recover. And this is so incredibly like life-changing for people when they do this. Like we have one student that was in bedridden with not multiple sclerosis, but just doctors didn't know what was wrong with her for 10 years. And then she was also put on psychiatric medications, and 2 weeks of just simply following the Live Disease-Free diet, she was actually able to start to get out of bed and start to read books again. It's just mind-blowing. So now she's on her second treatment cycle, I believe it is. She has passed so many worms. Like, it's not uncommon for our students to pass hundreds of worms. But just this last week, she was having a little bit of crampiness in her legs and a little bit of like pain under her while she's treating. Not the worst, but I mean, not great either, but underneath her rib. And then a day or two later, she passed this big ball or glob of worms. It looked like spaghetti, like incredible. And we have to be careful, because those types of worms can cause obstruction. So when we're treating these parasites from large to small, we definitely want to treat if we do have a lot of symptoms of the malaria Babesia type protozoa and the Borrelia. We may have both, but we also have worms. And so in order to recover, we need to treat all the pests, all the categories of the pests. And that is how we can actually recover and get our health and our life back. So make sure to type your questions in the question box, and our team will answer them after this event is finished. So make sure to type them in there. And if you enjoy what I'm sharing with you, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps to get the word out. It helps other people to see that there's hope, to see that there is a reason why they're sick. There is a cause, that it can be treated, that people can recover. And if you're new to all of this, make sure to check out our blog post on livediseasefree.com. It's an amazing library. You can scan my notes on topics that interest you. You can watch the shorter edited version of the videos. But when you get to that place, you're like, Pam, I know I have parasites. Everything you say makes sense. I have been trying to get my doctor to help me. They don't know about this. They're not really interested. They don't believe it. So if you're at that place, you're like, I need a plan. I need support. I need to get these critters out of my body as quick as possible. Make sure to check out our my masterclass training, livediseasefree.com. It is on livediseasefree.com, and there will also be a link right under or beside this video. So watch that masterclass training, and then if you need support, then fill out the form. You'll be able to watch the coachathon, and if it's a good fit, then you can start joining. We have students joining every week, and I would be honored to support you. It will change your life if you implement what I share. And I was just thinking about one lady I was speaking to today. She's like, I have tried everything. I've tried absolutely everything. The only thing I haven't tried is to treat parasites effectively. So maybe you have treated or tried to treat parasites with herbs, but if you have a chronic disease like MS, it isn't going to be enough. We have found that we do use herbs, but not on their own. So with that, I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and we will talk to you soon next week. Take care and bye-bye for now.